The city's most feared crime boss vanished without a trace, trading his empire for a cheap tuxedo and the anonymity of a service worker. Now, he is just Jay, a quiet waiter in an elite dining room, polishing silverware and suppressing the deadly instincts that defined his former life. This is hiding in plain sight, a meticulous strategy built on subservience and control. But every cover has a breaking point. Tonight, a powerful rival walks in, seeking to claim the territory the boss abandoned. He sits down, orders a scotch, and watches the waiter approach. The recognition is instant, cold and absolute. In a public space where violence means capture, the gangster is caught between two impossibilities: maintaining the lie or letting the killer resurface. The rhythmic clinking of cutlery was the sound of Julian Thorne's new life, a meticulous, polished symphony designed to drown out the sirens and the whispered threats of his old one. April 19th, 2025. The Saturday service at the Emerald Room was in full glorious swing. The restaurant, a cathedral of quiet wealth and Art Deco indulgence, hummed with the self-important chatter of the city's elite, oblivious to the fact that the man serving them their $80 scallops was the architect of the very economic landscape they navigated. Julian Thorne, 45, moved with the hyper-efficient grace that characterized both his leadership in the East Coast Syndicate and his current servitude. He was Jay now, a ghost in a starched white shirt and the restrictive discomfort of Jay's server apron, the rough canvas rubbing against the hidden magnetic clasp that secured his contingency phone, a lifeline to the obsidian drive. His meticulously groomed dark hair, a constant remnant of his former identity, was the only thing his current disguise could not entirely flatten. His focus was absolute, honed by decades of anticipating betrayal. He could hear the ice melting in a guest's Negroni 2 tables away, detect the minute shift in atmosphere when a deal was closed or when a marriage was quietly ending. This observational power, once used to manage territories and enforce loyalty, was now applied to seating charts, allergies, and the precise angle required to place a wineglass. It was tedious, suffocating, and perfectly safe. Jay, Booth 7, needs their dessert order taken 5 minutes ago. Move it. David Sterling, 55, the anxious floor manager whose slight paunch strained the limits of his impeccable suit, was the closest thing Thorne had to an immediate superior. Sterling's concerns revolved around inventory shrinkage and customer satisfaction scores, preoccupations so mundane they offered Thorne a profound, almost luxurious sense of peace. Thorne offered a curt, practiced nod, the subservient gesture chafing against the core of his personality, and pivoted toward Booth 7. The collapse of the syndicate had been brutal, swift, initiated by the relentless pressure applied since October 2024. Federal raids had gutted his infrastructure, forcing Julian into the Jay metamorphosis just 3 months ago, in January 2025. He was hiding in plain sight, calculating his re-entry strategy from the most vulnerable position imaginable. He collected the menus from Booth 7, maintaining the soft, non-committal facial expression of the professional service worker. He scanned the room automatically, a survival mechanism that never fully deactivated. The main dining room was full. The velvet booths lining the western wall were reserved for high-value clients. That was when the air changed. It wasn't a sound or a scent. It was a gravitational shift. Julian felt the subtle tightening in his chest, the internal alarm bell that had saved his life countless times. A party of 3 was being led by the maitre d' to Booth 4, centrally located and highly visible. Julian's eyes locked onto the leader of the party. Vincent Marino, 38, walked into the Emerald Room like a thunderstorm in a poorly fitted, flashy wardrobe. His stocky build seemed to push the boundaries of the polite space, and his receding hairline gave him a perpetually strained, bullish look. Marino, a capo Julian had always considered too volatile and opportunistic, was now swaggering through what had been Julian's city, believing the throne was empty. Thorne felt the cold, familiar grip of lethal intent wrap around his throat, immediately forcing the sensation down, suppressing the instinct to eliminate the threat before it registered. Breathe. You are Jay. You carry a wine key, not a silenced P-30. The maitre d' seated Marino's party and signaled Julian. Booth 4 was in Jay's section. This was not just unfortunate, it was catastrophic. Thorne had been tracking Marino's movements remotely, knowing the rival was actively carving up the abandoned territories, exploiting the vacuum left by Thorne's high-risk disappearance. To be forced to serve him was an exquisite, terrifying joke played by fate. Thorne approached the table, his spine straight, his movements slow and deliberate, erasing any trace of the Julian Thorne gait, the predatory confidence, the subtle, forward lean. "Good evening. Welcome to the Emerald Room. I am Jay, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." His voice was smooth, neutral, stripped of the commanding resonance that used to silence rooms. Marino barely glanced up, already scrolling through his phone, a thick, diamond-studded ring catching the low chandelier light. Yeah, bring me the good stuff. Not that domestic garbage, something Italian. Heavy. And my associates will have 2 of whatever's strongest. Certainly, sir. May I suggest the Barolo 2018? It pairs beautifully with our Wagyu. Wagyu, huh? Marino finally looked up, his eyes glassy with momentary confusion, analyzing the man standing before him as a background character. Fine. And make it quick. We got business. Thorne recited the specials with practiced monotony, his mind racing through escape routes, defensive maneuvers, and contingency protocols. He had the opportunity to poison Marino's wine, to trigger a smoke alarm, to feign a dizzy spell. Any number of moves to escape this immediate proximity. But that would break the illusion, shattering the fragile, protected existence of Jay. If he ran, the full force of the state and his rivals would know he was alive and vulnerable. He took the orders and retreated to the kitchen, the noise a temporary shield. Observation is power, Thorne reminded himself. He needed to watch Marino, assess his paranoia, and understand if this meeting was accidental or a planned trap. Back at booth 4, Thorne poured the Barolo, the heavy crimson liquid catching the light. He meticulously arranged the setting, a task that required absolute focus. He reached for the last piece of necessary hardware, a polished silver fork. As he centered the fork precisely next to Marino's untouched bread plate, ensuring the tines pointed perfectly toward the plate, a sign of impeccable service, Marino's heavy hand slammed down on the white tablecloth, stopping Thorne's movement mid-air. The silence that followed was confined only to the air between them. The restaurant noise continued, laughter, china clinking, music, but for Thorne the world had shrunk to the cold silver gleam of the fork, suspended inches from the rival's knuckles. Marino didn't smile. He didn't threaten. He simply spoke, his voice low, deliberate, and entirely devoid of the brash energy he had shown moments earlier. It was a voice tailored for a kill shot. "Do you really think a polyester blend and a bad name tag makes a difference, Julian Thorne?" The polished veneer of Jay evaporated instantly. It wasn't just the calling of his name, it was the casual, dismissive tone, the certainty that confirmed he had been recognized completely. Julian Thorne's steel-gray eyes met Vincent Marino's opportunistic gaze. The waiter was gone. The boss was back, trapped inside a uniform of servitude. Thorne did not flinch, but the muscles in his jaw tightened, the only visible sign of the seismic shift occurring internally. He maintained the subservient lean, the polite mask still affixed, despite the blood roaring in his ears. "Sir, I'm afraid you have me mistaken for someone else," Thorne replied, his voice maintaining the practiced flatness of Jay. He carefully completed the placement of the polished silver fork. Marino chuckled, a dry, grating sound. "Mistaken? The only thing I mistook, Julian, was your dedication to the game. Running, hiding behind a wine list. I always figured you for the type to go down swinging, not pouring water. If there's an issue with the service, I can call the manager," Thorne offered, initiating the escape protocol he'd practiced 1,000 times in his mind. The deflection, the appeal to higher authority Sterling, the oblivious manager, the creation of a public spectacle to prevent a private one. Marino leaned closer, his associates paying zero attention, absorbed in their own heavy conversation. "The manager? Don't insult me. The only one who runs this room is you, even dressed like a pauper. Now sit down, Julian. We need to talk about what you left behind. The syndicate is disorganized, and I am running out of patience cleaning up your mess." Thorne knew he had approximately 30 seconds before David Sterling noticed the waiter loitering too long at a table without actively serving. He had to convey maximum threat in minimum time. "I am currently employed, Mr. Marino," Thorne stated, folding his hands precisely over his apron, projecting calm. "If you wish to discuss business, you will schedule a reservation through the appropriate channels. This is neither the time nor the place." Miles away in the cold, windowless efficiency of the Federal Plaza Annex, Agent Sarah Albright, 51, was staring at a constellation of red dots on a large projected map of the city. Athletic and lean, her severe ponytail tight against her neck, she had the perpetually tired expression of a woman who chased shadows for a living. "Status on Operation Veil," she demanded into her headset. A young analyst responded immediately. "Phase 3 initiated, Agent Albright. We have visual confirmation on 3 of the known Thorn associates meeting simultaneously across the city. The pressure is working. They're panicking." Agent Albright's entire professional life had been dedicated to dismantling Julian Thorn's operation. She had chased the ghost for years, feeling the weight of the city's corruption pressing down on her highly ethical, relentless pursuit. She knew Thorn was out there. She had dedicated every resource to the recovery of the Obsidian Drive, the encrypted digital storage device believed to hold not only the full accounting of the syndicate, but also damning leverage against half the city government. "Maintain surveillance on all known Thorn properties. If he risks contact, we take him. I need that drive, people. It's the only way we collapse the structure completely. The raids only took out the foot soldiers. Thorn is the head." Albright glanced at a filtered photograph of the Thorn Tower penthouse, now sealed and empty. She knew that Thorn, a master of disguise and evasion, would not have fled without a calculated plan. He was watching them as closely as they were watching the city. Back at the Emerald Room, the tension between Thorn and Marino was a silent, oscillating frequency. Thorn had calculated the probability. Marino was short-fused, but too opportunistic to cause a public scene that might draw official attention before he secured whatever prize he believed Julian was hiding. Marino wanted leverage, not a shootout in a fancy restaurant. "You need to step away from the table, Jay," Marino repeated, his eyes narrowed. Thorn knew the only move left was to use the very leverage Marino thought he possessed. "Do you know why I survived the federal investigation, Vincent?" Thorn whispered, leaning in so only Marino could hear, his breath cool and controlled. "Because I knew who was vulnerable, who would talk and who could be silenced. The evidence I secured didn't just protect me from the Bureau, it protected me from you." Marino's confident posture wavered slightly. "What are you talking about?" "The Obsidian Drive, Vincent. You think I left it in the Thorn Tower penthouse for the Bureau to find?" Thorn gave a slight, almost imperceptible shake of his head. "It's secure. And on that drive, Vincent, is the full account of your expenditures over the last 2 years. Every side deal, every unauthorized territory grab, every instance of you skimming the top while telling the board otherwise." Marino's face, already flushed, paled significantly. He hadn't expected the waiter to counterattack with the threat of internal exposure, a far more immediate and painful death sentence than federal prison. "You're bluffing," Marino sneered, though the conviction was gone, replaced by sudden, raw panic. "Am I?" Thorn smiled faintly, a movement that did not reach his eyes, making the expression terrifying. "I have not disappeared, Vincent. I am merely observing. You have 2 options, here and now. Option A, you shout my name, the police come, I am taken, but a digitally signed copy of your financial indiscretions is immediately forwarded to the few remaining loyalists who despise your opportunism. You might take my place in a cell, but you will certainly be dismembered before you finish your first sentence there." Thorn straightened, regaining his full height, the server uniform suddenly looking like an inadequate camouflage for the predator beneath. "Option B," Thorn continued, returning to the neutral tone of Jay. "You forget you ever saw me. You order your Wagyu, you finish your wine, and you walk out of this restaurant believing I am still gone. You manage the territories you claim, but you leave mine, my private matters, alone. If you choose option B, nothing happens to you. You continue to breathe, Vincent. You continue to skim." The power dynamic had violently reversed. Marino, trapped by his own greed and recklessness, was now staring at the true ruthless leader who had merely exchanged his penthouse for a public vantage point. "You can't stay here forever," Marino managed, his voice now ragged. "The duration of my stay is irrelevant," Thorn countered smoothly. "What is relevant is that I know where you are now, Vincent, and you know where I am. We are both exposed, but only one of us has the mechanism to destroy the other from a distance." Thorn reached out slowly, took the wine bottle and topped up Marino's glass, performing the task with flawless professional courtesy. "Enjoy your dinner, Mr. Marino," he said, stepping back from the table. "Please let me know if you require anything else." Marino stared into the depths of the Barolo, his hands shaking slightly. He had come here expecting to gloat, to claim a victory, and instead, he had stumbled into a cage trap set by a genius. The waiter walked away, leaving Marino paralyzed by the knowledge that one word, one mistake would trigger his total destruction. Julian Thorne walked past David Sterling, who gave him a brief, relieved nod. "Good recovery, Jay." "They look satisfied. Just needed the wine poured, David," Thorne said, his heart rate returning to a sustainable rhythm, the immense effort of suppressing the violence leaving him momentarily exhausted. He moved behind the service station, his hands trembling slightly, hidden beneath the lip of the counter. The confrontation had been the most terrifying moment of his undercover life. His identity was confirmed. The peace was shattered. The J metamorphosis had served its purpose, but the clock had just started ticking again. Thorne pulled out a pristine napkin and wiped down a small spill he had intentionally created, his gaze drifting toward the ornate clock above the entrance. He knew he could not stay the night. Marino, though momentarily subdued, was a volatile element. He would panic, and panicked rivals made mistakes that led to federal intervention. Thorne reached into the hidden compartment of Jay's server apron and touched the cold metallic surface of the communication device linked to the Obsidian drive protocols. He didn't need to physically possess the drive. He needed access to its remote functions. He had bought himself perhaps 2 hours. 2 hours to clear his immediate presence, to trigger the necessary contingencies, and to once again disappear. Julian Thorne poured a glass of ice water for another table, the epitome of calm service, while internally the entire operational structure of his life was being torn down and rebuilt. He had stared down a lethal threat in the most public of arenas and walked away undetected by the wider world. The waiter uniform had saved him by forcing him into control. But now control demanded violence, or at least the threat of it, followed by immediate flight. He scanned the faces in the room one last time. Every high-status customer was a piece of his collateral. Every subtle movement was a data point. The Emerald Room wasn't just a hiding spot, it was his surveillance post. Thorne adjusted the polished silver fork on a nearby table, ensuring its alignment was perfect. He was no longer Jay, the anonymous waiter. He was Julian Thorne, the ghost, moving through the city he owned, now forced to kill his own disguise to survive the dawn. He would vanish into the pre-dawn shadows, leaving behind nothing but the perfect, untouched table settings and a very frightened Vincent Marino. The game had just moved from observation to action. He headed toward the manager's office, already formulating the flawless, immediate resignation that would ensure his sudden disappearance felt like nothing more than a minor inconvenience to David Sterling, rather than the escape of the most wanted man on the East Coast. The forced composure Julian held while topping Vincent's glass was an act of profound, disciplined violence. He was a tightly coiled spring, the pressure of 3 months of subservience now meeting the sudden, brutal recognition of his deadliest rival. The silence he had demanded from Vincent was not based on loyalty or respect, but pure, agonizing self-interest. It was a momentary truce in a war that had just been redeclared in the center of a crowded room. Julian turned away, navigating the densely packed aisle, his senses screaming. The ambient noise of the Emerald Room, the low roar of conversation, the cheerful clink of the martini shakers, the soft jazz filtering from hidden speakers, was an assault. Every sound now seemed amplified, threatening to expose the profound disturbance he was fighting to contain. He felt the weight of Jay's server apron, no longer a comfortable shield, but a suffocating shroud that highlighted his vulnerability. He needed to breathe, to stabilize the rapid-fire computations occurring in his mind. Time, maximum 120 minutes, until Vincent breaks. Location, public, exposed. Objective, complete extraction and execution of Phase Beta. He reached the service station, meticulously placing a dirty napkin into the linen bin, his movements precise, practiced, betraying nothing of the internal storm. David, leaning against the pass, oblivious to the high-stakes drama that had just played out inches from his post, signaled Julian toward the kitchen. "Jay, table 14 is complaining about the risotto. Says it's too al dente. Chef Marco is having a fit. Can you manage that?" David sighed, running a hand over his receding silver hair. His anxiety was focused entirely on the evening's Yelp reviews. Julian nodded, the movement minimal. "Of course, David. He'll smooth it over." This was the mundane armor of Jay, solving minor grievances while his very existence was on the line. He took the lukewarm risotto plate and entered the kitchen, the cacophony of banging pots, shouted orders, and sizzling grease washing over him. It was a chaotic, necessary shield. He ducked into the staff restroom, a cramped space smelling faintly of bleach and stale coffee. He locked the door and ripped off the apron. His hands, usually steady as bedrock, shook only slightly as he retrieved the communication device from the hidden magnetic compartment. It was sleek, nondescript, and contained the key sequence to the Obsidian Drive's remote activation protocols. This was his fail-safe. If Vincent moved against him, Julian would burn the city down to protect himself. 2 hours. The clock was ticking, tied to his digital ghost. He replaced the device, smoothing the apron back into place. Julian looked into the smeared mirror. The controlled ruthlessness of Julian Thorne stared back through the steel-grey eyes, but the face was still thin, tired, and marked by the pale exhaustion of Jay. The metamorphosis had been deep, but incomplete. He returned to the kitchen, the weight of his calculated escape now settling on him. He needed to eliminate Julian Thorne, the waiter. Julian approached David, who was currently preoccupied with reconciling a double-booked reservation. "David," Julian said, his voice flat, slightly strained, sounding like genuine exhaustion, "I need to leave. Immediately." David didn't look up. "Jay, you can't be serious. We're slammed. What about booth 4? They haven't even seen their appetizer yet." "It's a family emergency, David." "Critical," Julian insisted, injecting just the right measure of quiet panic into his tone, enough to be urgent, not enough to be suspicious. He knew David's deep aversion to personal conflict. "My sister, she's in the city. A major medical event. I apologize profoundly for the inconvenience, but I cannot stay." David finally looked up, annoyance melting into genuine, if self-centered, distress. "Oh dear. Well, I suppose. Booth 4 is Marino. He's usually volatile. Don't you think? He's stable for the moment." "I poured their wine and took the order," Julian interjected quickly, preempting any lingering concern about Vincent. "He'll write down all open tasks. I promise I will cover the shift I missed next week. No questions asked." Julian reached for a pad, his pen flying across the paper, detailing the exact needs of his entire section: allergies, wine pairings, seating notes. A masterpiece of managerial diligence designed to erase any possibility of resentment or deep scrutiny later. He included a note about Vincent's table: Booth 4 high maintenance. Ensure Barolo is decanted fully. Mr. Marino appreciates efficiency. "There," Julian said, handing the pad to David. "Everything accounted for. I'll send a text tonight about my status. My sincere apologies, David." David, overwhelmed by the sudden workload transfer, but mollified by Julian's efficiency, waved him off. "Go, Jay, but don't make this a habit. Find someone to cover tomorrow." Julian offered a quick, subservient nod, the final act of Jay. He moved swiftly to the locker room. In 30 seconds, he stripped off the uniform and donned the anonymous street clothes he kept hidden in a canvas duffel bag: dark denim, a plain black hoodie, and a nondescript backpack containing cash, a spare burner phone not linked to the Obsidian Drive protocol, and fake identification papers prepared 3 months earlier. He glanced at his reflection one last time. The meticulously groomed hair remained, a residual marker, but the posture was changing. The slump of servitude replaced by the rigid, alert stance of the operative. He exited the employee entrance, located in a dimly lit alley behind the high-rise. The outside air was cool, carrying the scent of exhaust and rain. Julian walked immediately, not running, using the ingrained discipline of decades of evasion. He merged seamlessly with the Friday night foot traffic, turning his head constantly, cataloguing every figure, every shadow, every parked vehicle. He was a ghost again, but this time, a compromised ghost. Meanwhile, in the sterile, air-conditioned confines of the Federal Plaza Annex, Sarah was focused intently on the flickering map of the city. The green light indicating the Emerald Room suddenly pulsed yellow, signifying a change in activity patterns, tracked by a proprietary algorithm designed to monitor specific communication spikes in high-value commercial zones. "Bring up the thermal data for the Emerald Room area now," Sarah instructed the analyst, maintaining her severe professional composure. The screen shifted, showing a grid of heat signatures. "We're seeing a high-volume encrypted communication originating from within the restaurant, Agent Albright," the analyst reported. "It's spiking, localized in the Western dining section, Booth 4 specifically. It looks like a hurried, unscheduled burst of data. Could be a panic signal." Sarah leaned closer, her analytical mind dissecting the timing. Operation Veil, the pressure campaign, was designed to make Thorne's lieutenants panic and force them to reveal his whereabouts or their own vulnerabilities. Vincent Marino was a primary target, volatile, predictable, and currently running the streets Julian had abandoned. "Who is at booth 4 tonight?" Sarah asked, her voice low and sharp, cross-referencing reservations. David Sterling confirmed the booking. "It's Vincent Marino and 2 of his known associates, Agent Albright." Sarah's heart rate stabilized, not from relief, but from the sudden clarity of the threat. Marino was the opportunist, not the strategist. If he was panicking, it meant he had encountered something or someone he hadn't planned for. Marino doesn't use high-level encryption for takeout orders. He only panics when the structure is threatened from above. "Julian Thorne," Sarah whispered, the name tasting like cold steel on her tongue. "He's there, or he was just there." He used his presence to shake Marino. The concept of Thorne, the meticulously controlled leader, hiding as a service worker, had been dismissed by the Bureau as pure fantasy, a disguise too vulnerable for a man of his stature. But Sarah knew Thorne's genius lay in the unexpected, the audacious, hiding in plain sight, using the very elite he controlled as cover. "We need eyes on Marino, now. Dispatch 2 assets to the location. If Marino leaves, track him, but do not engage. I want to know who he meets next. This communication burst is our window." Sarah knew the window would be tight. If Julian had been exposed, he would already be moving. And if the Obsidian Drive was involved, the threat wasn't just to their investigation, but to the entire city administration. The stakes were impossibly high. In the Emerald Room, Vincent Marino remained seated at booth 4, staring at the perfectly placed polished silver fork. The elegance of the setting, the quiet judgment of the elite around him, felt like a deliberate mockery. He was sweating, despite the restaurant's perfect climate control. Julian's threat had been effective precisely because it was so measured, so quiet. It wasn't a promise of violence. It was a guarantee of public, humiliating, and lethal exposure to his own board. He had to confirm the existence of the Obsidian Drive. So if Julian was bluffing, Vincent would send a team to handle the errant waiter immediately. If he wasn't, Vincent needed to neutralize the threat remotely. He reached for his phone, his fingers trembling. He couldn't call a loyalist. Julian had implied surveillance. He needed a neutral party, someone far enough outside the current chaos to provide confirmation without sounding an alarm. He hit send, his breath shallow. The message was oblique, protected by several layers of common terminology, but it was a desperate gamble. A young busser cleared the plate of the untouched, lukewarm risotto, oblivious to the simmering rage emanating from booth 4. Vincent watched the service staff, searching for a sign of Julian or Jay, but the man was gone. He felt a sudden, sickening jolt of panic. Julian hadn't just walked away. He had vanished the moment he delivered the ultimatum. "That son of a bitch," Vincent muttered, slamming his fist lightly on the plush velvet seat. He ran. The immediate flight confirmed Julian was not bluffing. The fact that he disappeared without fanfare or conflict meant he had initiated his deep-level escape protocol. Vincent was trapped between a rock and a hard place. Expose Julian and face certain internal destruction, or remain silent and live under the constant, suffocating threat of the drive. The message sent a cold spike of fear through Vincent. Active and mobile, Julian had the power in his hands. Vincent rose abruptly, overturning his chair with a heavy, jarring clatter that briefly silenced the nearby tables. The maitre d' rushed over, concern etched onto his face. "Marino, is everything all right?" "The service is appalling," Vincent snarled, ignoring the curious glances. "Where is the waiter? The one named Jay?" David, approaching nervously, rushed to cover the situation. "Marino, I apologize. Jay had an urgent family emergency. He resigned just moments ago. I will personally take over your table, sir. May I get you another glass of Barolo?" Resigned. Vincent felt the blood drain from his face. Julian hadn't just left. He had executed a clean break, preventing any attempt by Vincent to drag him back or accuse him of unprofessional behavior. He was gone, leaving only the fear behind. "Yes, sir." Very suddenly, David confirmed, genuinely flustered. Vincent shoved past David, his associate scrambling to follow. He had to assume Julian was already targeting him, already preparing the trigger. He needed to be the first to move. His plan shifted from confronting Julian to finding a way to destroy the server hubs before the 2-hour clock ran out. He burst out of the Emerald Room and onto the street, his flashy wardrobe suddenly making him painfully conspicuous. He raised his phone, ignoring his associates' shouted questions. He didn't call the cleanup crew. He called his technology expert, demanding an immediate, untraceable meeting. Julian was 3 blocks away, having shed the dark hoodie for a light jacket pulled from his backpack. He moved through a crowded subway station, using the sheer volume of humanity as a thermal and visual screen. He felt the shift in his identity. Jay, the man who cared about silverware, was fully dead. Julian Thorne, the survivor, was in command. He checked his burner phone. A secure ping confirmed Vincent's frantic, localized communication spike, the immediate follow-up call to the tech expert. Predictable. Vincent would rush to destroy the data, not to find Julian. This bought him time. Julian walked out of the subway station in an entirely different district, the architecture changing from modern high-rise glass to older utilitarian brick. He entered a discreet, pre-rented short-term apartment, a designated safe house, one of many established during the October 2024 pressure campaign. Inside, the apartment was sparse, clean, and equipped with only the necessities of an operative: communications gear, a detailed map of the city's deep infrastructure, and layers of soundproofing. Julian removed the server apron from his backpack and tossed it onto a table. He retrieved the device and connected it to a secure terminal. The 2-hour countdown was visible, a green digital timer mocking him. He worked with the focus that had defined his career. Every keystroke was deliberate, every protocol executed perfectly. He was leveraging the time he bought with his threat against Vincent to fortify his permanent disappearance. Back at Federal Plaza Annex, Sarah watched the screens explode with new activity. The pressure had worked, but not as expected. Instead of finding Thorne, they were drowning in a flood of fragmented data. Small asset movements, minor cash drops, logistical details of low-level criminal operations. "What is this?" Sarah demanded, rubbing the exhaustion from her eyes. "It's too much. It's a targeted data dump. Someone is trying to obscure the signal." "Agent Albright, look at the correlation." The analyst pointed to a specific spike. This surge of small-scale movements began precisely 10 minutes after Vincent Marino left the Emerald Room and made that encrypted call. He didn't run from the city. He's running through the city, making himself invisible by making everything visible, Sarah assessed. He's manipulating the market. He knows we're chasing the drive. The data dump is meant to slow us down. She slammed her hand on the desk. "Pull all resources off the local movement data. Focus entirely on tracking Vincent Marino's communications. Thorne won't risk physical contact, but hell ensure Marino is terrified enough to make a mistake. Marino is the key to finding the real location of the drive. Thorne just proved he can hit the kill switch on Marino's life from anywhere." Sarah knew the nature of the confrontation in the Emerald Room must have been volcanic, a violent reversal of power. Julian had used his weakness, being a waiter, to deliver his greatest threat: total data exposure. In the secure apartment, Julian finalized his preparations. The data smokescreen was running autonomously. The 2-hour timer on Vincent's doom had dropped to 50 minutes. Julian considered Vincent's current position. He would be meeting his tech expert, likely in an abandoned warehouse or secure communication center, frantic to find a way to hack the 3 server locations simultaneously, an impossible task without the access codes Julian possessed. Julian had 2 options: remain in the current safe house and manage the situation remotely, or initiate the next level of disappearance. Remaining was too risky. Vincent might panic and try a brute force attack on the current area, based on guesswork. He needed to vanish into the deep web, into the global network of untraceable infrastructure that only a man of his resources could construct. He began the final, irreversible procedure. He connected the device again. This time, he inputted the sequence to cancel the public exposure of the Obsidian drive data, the kill code. Vincent was neutralized, his panic used to buy critical time. The danger was temporarily averted. However, the act of securing his position initiated a secondary protocol, the complete digital erasure of Jay. The job was done. The subservient life was over. Julian Thorne had weaponized his servitude and achieved a clean exfiltration. He stood, pulling on a fitted leather jacket, a stark contrast to the rough canvas apron, and adjusted the collar. The man who looked in the mirror now was sharp, dangerous, and free of the constraints of the service world. He left the burner phone in the apartment, knowing Sarah's team was likely attempting to triangulate its position already. He placed the device linked to the obsidian drive deep within a new, highly specialized compartment in his jacket. This was not merely a physical escape. It was a transition back to full operational status, but operating from the deepest shadows. Julian walked out into the cool night, blending immediately with the shadows of the old city district. He knew Vincent would now be paralyzed by the knowledge that Julian was still out there, wielding the ultimate lever. Vincent would be forced into a temporary, terrified compliance, managing the syndicate under the constant, silent threat of exposure. As for Sarah, she would chase the data smokescreen for days, wasting critical resources on phantom targets. Julian Thorne had learned an invaluable lesson while standing behind the service station. True power was never in confrontation, but in observation and control of the narrative. He was no longer running from his empire. He was running his empire from an entirely new, untraceable vantage point. The city lights faded behind him, illuminating the massive, vacant silhouette of the Thorne Tower penthouse. Julian did not look back. He had dissolved into the system, achieving the ultimate invisibility. The waiter was gone. The boss had become a legend again, leaving behind a terrified rival, a frustrated federal agent, and the perfectly set tables of the Emerald Room as the only evidence of his brief, dangerous detour into the light. Julian had cancelled the public exposure trigger, not out of mercy, but out of necessity. If the entire city ledger went public now, the resulting chaos would bring down every level of federal scrutiny on the specific areas where the drive's servers were housed, jeopardizing their long-term security. The goal was control, not destruction. He needed Vincent alive and terrified, serving as an unwitting shield against the inevitable internal power vacuum. The timer was frozen at 50 minutes, a psychological weapon now, not a deadline. Julian opened a secured messaging channel, bypassing the burner phone he left behind. He watched the real-time communication feed between Vincent and Leo, monitoring the frantic exchange as Leo attempted to explain the futility of destroying the data architecture Julian had built. "It's not a single server, Vinny," Leo's digitized voice cracked over the channel. "It's a tripartite, geo-redundant system. You'd need 3 separate clean teams simultaneously, and the specific quantum keys to bypass the physical hardening. Thorne built this to withstand a tactical strike, not a quick hack. We need the kill code." Vincent's reply, tracked through his secured chat, was furious, laden with profanity Julian easily filtered out. "I need a solution, not a technical report. If that data drops, I'm dead. The whole network burns." "The network isn't burning, Vincent," Julian thought, a cold smile touching his lips. "It's simply changing management." Julian tapped a single key, sending an infinitesimally small data packet, heavily encrypted and routed through 3 international proxy networks, directly to Leo's terminal in the warehouse. The message, designed to look like a system anomaly, was simple, targeting Vincent's deepest fear. It bypassed Leo's firewalls and appeared as a plain text overlay on his main screen. Leo recoiled physically from his terminal, alerted by the sudden hostile intrusion. "Vinny, we're compromised. That wasn't a hack. That was a surgical insertion. He knows we're here, and the timer, it's still running." Vincent grabbed Leo's collar, desperation overriding decades of ingrained caution. "What does it mean, Leo? What does he want?" "He doesn't want anything, Vinny. He's showing you he can reach you anywhere. He just demonstrated total access." Leo gestured wildly at the screen, which reverted to normal, leaving behind only the chilling memory of the warning. "This is a death sentence, Vinny. He's not going to destroy the data. He's going to use it to control everything you do from now on." This was the core of Julian's phase beta, shifting the dynamic from escape to domination from a distance. Vincent needed to believe the sword of Damocles was perpetually hanging over him. Julian leaned closer to his screen, finalizing the execution of his operational withdrawal. He confirmed the external transport, a discreet private jet chartered through 3 layers of shell corporations, waiting at a remote regional airfield. Julian opened a new window, bypassing his active operational network, using the clean burner line. He typed an anonymous, extremely technical report detailing the structure of the Obsidian drive servers, including their geographical coordinates and the level of legal protection afforded to the data by his self-inflicted failsafe, making them effectively a high-value government evidence lockup, legally untouchable without a complex high-level warrant process. He sent the document to a specific secured email address, Agent Sarah Albright's private, verified communication line. He included one final untraceable addendum, a personal note of calculated arrogance, a final flourish from the man who used to be Jay. P.S. informed David that I won't be covering my shift next Tuesday. The risotto truly was too al dente. At Federal Plaza Annex, Sarah felt the energy shift instantly when her secured personal terminal pinged. The email address was untraceable, a phantom source, yet the attachment contained information that made the blood freeze in her veins. It wasn't guesswork. It was a blueprint. The Obsidian Drive was real. Its structure, its location, and the details of the leverage it held against city officials were laid bare, not for public consumption, but for Sarah's tactical use. "Get me a team to those coordinates now," Sarah commanded, pointing to the 3 geographically distinct server locations Julian had detailed. "Do not approach the buildings yet. I need legal and forensics to analyze this data package. If Thorne is right, these sites are now protected assets. We move too fast, we lose the evidence in a legal battle." Sarah reread the postscript. The audacity stole her breath. It confirmed everything. Julian Thorne, the ruthless kingpin, had been hiding as a hyper-efficient waiter, observing her targets from behind a silver tray. He was mocking her, but he was also handing her the only thing she truly needed: control over the chaos he created. "He didn't just leave the Emerald Room, he liquidated his identity," Sarah muttered to her analyst. "He's gone, but he just gave us the keys to his kingdom." Just as Sarah was coordinating the legal maneuver to seize the servers, without destroying the complex legal protections Julian had woven around them, the tactical team tracking Vincent reported movement. "Marino is exiting the warehouse, Agent Albright. He is agitated, frantic, and looks physically ill. His tech guy, Leo, is right behind him." Sarah knew Julian's message must have landed. Vincent was now moving without a plan, driven purely by panic. "Hold the perimeter. Let Marino get 3 blocks away, then light them up. Arrest both of them on suspicion of conspiracy to destroy evidence related to a federal investigation," Sarah ordered. "Thorne wants us to know he's untouchable, but he left the pawn exposed." Sarah watched the tactical feed as the lights and sirens erupted in the desolate warehouse district. Vincent, caught between the crushing fear of Julian's remote control and the immediate threat of federal apprehension, didn't even attempt to run. He collapsed against the brick wall, screaming at Leo about the betrayal. The arrest was clean, efficient, and deeply satisfying, yet Sarah felt no triumph. They had captured the lieutenant, but the Emperor had simply moved his throne. Sarah picked up the polished silver fork Julian had left behind on his last visit to Booth 4. It had been logged as potential evidence. She ran a careful finger over the tines. Julian had used the mundane world as his shield and his weapon. The obsidian veil has lifted, Sarah thought, but the shadow it cast is far wider than we ever imagined. In the passenger seat of a high-speed sedan driving toward the regional airfield, Julian watched the city lights recede. The scent of ozone had been replaced by the rich, clean smell of new leather and polished chrome, the ambience of a life reclaimed. Julian adjusted the expensive coat he wore. The physical transformation from Jay to Julian was complete. The slump was gone, replaced by the effortless posture of absolute authority. The weariness of servitude had been washed away by the adrenaline of the strategic victory. He thought of David, the anxious, oblivious manager, still struggling with Table 14's overcooked chicken. Julian felt a strange, detached pity for the lives he had briefly shared. Serving had been a form of penance, a forced lesson in vulnerability that had sharpened his predatory instincts. He had learned exactly where the blind spots of the elite lay, and how easy it was to manipulate the expectations of the privileged. No one looks down when they look up, he reflected. The elite saw a waiter, not a warlord. The car pulled onto the tarmac next to a sleek dark jet. The engines were already spooling up, promising anonymity and distance. 2 of Julian's most trusted, non-syndicate operatives waited on the steps, their faces impassive. They were his global network, loyal only to the threat of the Obsidian Drive and the promise of endless resource. As Julian ascended the steps, he realized the ultimate consequence of his brief life as Jay. He no longer needed the Thorn Tower penthouse. He no longer needed the physical symbols of power. He had transitioned from a localized boss to a decentralized sovereign. He entered the jet's opulent cabin. A glass of aged single malt scotch waited, precisely poured. He looked out the small sealed window as the jet began its taxi. Below, the sprawling lights of the city represented millions of moving parts. Politicians, bankers, police, rivals, all unknowingly tethered to the data Julian held in his pocket. The city was no longer a territory to be held, but a fragile system to be managed remotely. The pilot received clearance. The powerful engines screamed, pressing Julian back into the seat. He was airborne, leaving behind the frantic activity of Sarah's investigation and the despair of Vincent's capture. Julian closed his eyes. He had achieved total victory, not through firepower, but through digital manipulation and disciplined patience cultivated while serving demanding customers. The waiter was buried, the Mafia boss reborn, but now a ghost boss, ruling through information alone. The jet tilted, banking sharply over the coast, heading east, toward the vast, untraceable global networks where true power resided. Julian Thorne raised the glass of scotch in a silent, solitary toast. The obsidian veil had indeed been pierced, but only to allow the true architect of the shadows to finally slip through and gain permanent, untraceable freedom. He had gone undercover to hide and emerged, paradoxically, to dominate. The Emerald Room was secure, the silverware polished, and the memory of Jay was meticulously erased, leaving behind only the cold, pervasive reach of Julian Thorne's invisible hand. Hit like, join the squad.